Do you believe that in every family, two parallel worlds exist? One is the world of memory, love, and the silent sacrifices of parents. The other is the world of dreams, ambitions, and sometimes the thoughtlessness of children. In today's story, those two worlds are about to collide head-on at the wedding of a young couple. They invited 1,200 guests to their farm, but the mother, the true owner, had another plan entirely. This collision created an outcome that no one could have ever expected. Welcome to Deepu Cater Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know which city you're watching from. If you were forced to stand between those two worlds, would you choose to protect the memories of the past or accept the future your child has planned? Part 1. The Day the Truth Stood Up. My name is Martha Covington. I am 68 years old. I used to think that if you raised your child right, you could leave this world with no regrets. But then came the day I learned some things, no matter how freely you give them, are never truly returned. It was a Saturday, the 14th of October. I remember the air had that kind of crispness that promises a cold winter is on its way. From the porch, I watched them arrive. Two streams of cars, flowing into my life like rivers that should never have met. On the left, coming up the main drive, were my people. The town mayor in his sensible Ford, the families from church whose children grew up with my Marcus, the volunteers who had stood by me for a decade. Their cars were modest, their faces familiar. They came for the 10th annual Edward Covington Memorial Fundraiser. They came for my husband. They came for a memory. On the right, turning down the gravel path we rarely used, were her people. Sleek, dark cars I didn't recognize, reflecting the morning sun like polished stones you'd find in a jewelry shop. The men wore tailored suits that looked uncomfortable in the country air. The women wore dresses that cost more than my first tractor. They were here for a wedding I had never approved, a wedding planned for my home, on my land, without so much as a whisper to the woman who owned it. 1,200 guests in total. That was the number she had boasted about on her social media. 600 for my husband's memory. 600 for her fantasy. All of them converging on my front lawn, kicking up dust that settled on my late roses. I stood there, on the porch Samuel and I had built with our own hand, a mug of coffee growing cold in my grasp, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow, just the hollow calm that comes after the storm has already broken inside you and there's nothing left to break. Then I saw their car, a long, white limousine that looked foolish and out of place against the backdrop of my red barn. The door opened. My son, Marcus, stepped out first, fussing with his tuxedo, which looked too tight for his shoulders. And, beside him, his fiancée, Kimberly Vance. A vision in a white dress so brilliant it hurt my eyes to look at it directly. She was the one who saw me first. She left Marcus's side, her dress rustling against the dry autumn grass. She marched towards the porch, her face a mask of beautiful fury. The volunteers setting up the welcome tent stopped what they were doing. The guests parking their cars turned to look. A hush fell. "Mrs. Covington," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She stopped at the bottom step, forcing me to look down at her. "What is all this?" "This is our wedding farm. Our wedding farm." The words hung in the chilly air between us. "Our..." I looked past her, to my son. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stood there, a stranger in a suit, staring at the dirt his father had tilled for 40 years. His own father. I brought my gaze back to the girl in the white dress. I looked at her, at the chaos she had invited into my home, at the son I no longer recognized, standing silently behind her. And then, I spoke. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. "You see," I said, and the words came out low and clear. "The trouble with a lie is that it needs the truth to lean on. And today, the truth decided to stand up on its own." The story didn't start there on that October morning. Of course, it never does. It started 6 months earlier, on a Sunday afternoon that felt warm and full of promise. It started, as so many tragedies do, with a happy announcement. Part 2: Seeds and a Digital Field. It was April. The dogwoods were in bloom. Their white flowers like little ghosts hovering in the green woods that bordered the farm. Marcus brought Kimberly over for Sunday dinner. He had that nervous energy about him, the kind he always got before asking for something. I thought he was going to ask for a loan. Instead, he asked for my blessing. He stood in the middle of my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd wiped jam from his face 1,000 times. And he held Kimberly's hand. She held up her other hand, and a diamond the size of a robin's egg caught the light. "We're getting married." "Mom," he said, his voice full of a hope I hadn't heard in years. For a moment, all the weariness I carry in my bones just vanished. My son, my only child, getting married. I hugged them both, smelling Kimberly's expensive perfume and feeling the wiry strength in Marcus's arms. I made Samuel's famous pot roast that night, the one I only make for special occasions. And as I watched them across the dinner table, laughing and planning, I felt a deep, quiet joy. I thought, Samuel would have liked her fire. I really believed that. The unease started quietly. A week or so later, it began. As so many modern troubles do, on the internet. My niece showed me how to use that Instagram application on my phone. Mostly I used it to see pictures of her children. But one day, Kimberly's profile popped up. It was public, for the whole world to see. The pictures were beautiful. I'll admit, professional. Even, there was one of her and Marcus, silhouetted against the sunset over my west pasture. The caption read, "Sunsets at home just hit different. Covington Estate living. Home." The word felt strange. It was my home, not hers. Not yet. I scrolled down. There was another picture of her, posing on the front porch swing, a glass of wine in her hand. The caption, "Getting to know every nook and cranny of my future domain, future mistress of the meadows." Mistress of the meadows. That's what Samuel used to call me, in a teasing voice, when I'd come in from the garden with dirt on my knees. Hearing it from her, it felt like she was trying on my clothes that didn't fit. I closed the application. I told myself I was being a foolish old woman, that this was how young people were. They lived their lives out loud. I tried to ignore the small, cold knot that had begun to form in the pit of my stomach. A month later, they came for dinner again. This time, Kimberly had a large leather-bound notebook with her, a wedding planner. She spread it out on the dining table, covering it with fabric swatches and pictures torn from magazines. "So, we've been thinking about a date," she said, her voice bright and full of business. "We're leaning towards mid-October. The autumn colors here are just spectacular. A real rustic chic vibe." She said it so casually, mid-October, as if those words didn't hold a weight in this house, as if that month wasn't sacred. I looked at Marcus. He was busy pushing mashed potatoes around his plate, his eyes focused on nothing. I carefully placed my fork down on my napkin. I kept my voice gentle, soft, the way you'd speak to a skittish horse. "Kimberly," I began, "October is a beautiful month, but Marcus knows the second Saturday is always the fundraiser for his father." She looked at me, a polite smile fixed on her face. "Oh, of course, the fundraiser. We wouldn't want to interfere." I felt a small wave of relief. "The 14th of October this year," I added, "just to be clear, the 14th. She repeated, tapping the date with a perfectly manicured nail. "Got it." The conversation moved on, but I watched my son. He never looked up. Not once. He just kept moving his food around, as if he could rearrange the truth of the matter right there on his plate. Later that evening, after they had gone, I stood in the quiet kitchen. The smell of pot roast still lingered in the air. A happy smell. But I felt no happiness. I felt a chill. The kind that has nothing to do with the temperature. I replayed the conversation in my head. Her easy dismissal, his deliberate silence. He knows, I thought. He knows the 14th is the fundraiser. He's known it his whole life. Why didn't he say anything? Why did he let her just skate right over it? And that's when I heard it. A small, quiet voice in the back of my mind. The voice of a woman who has lived long enough to know that the most dangerous lies are not the ones we tell, but the ones we allow to be told in our presence. He He was hiding something. My son was hiding something from me. I picked up his plate from the table. The mashed potatoes were cold, sculpted into a little wall around a piece of meat he had never touched. A wall. I scraped it all into the trash. And, for the first time in a very long time, I went to bed feeling like a stranger in my own home. I ignored the feeling. I told myself it was nothing. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Part 3. The Paper Cut. The weeks that followed that Sunday dinner were quiet. Too quiet. Marcus didn't call. Kimberly filled her social media with pictures of wedding dresses and floral arrangements. But she never tagged me. She never mentioned me at all. It was as if I had become a ghost in the background of my own life. The unease in my gut tightened from a small knot into a cold, heavy stone. It sat there every morning when I drank my coffee and every night when I lay in bed. The truth, when it finally came, didn't arrive with a thunderclap. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, through the telephone line, disguised as good news. The caller was Beatrice Miller, a dear woman from the town council. Her voice was full of cheerful excitement. "Martha, darling," she chirped. "I just saw the most wonderful thing online, an e-invitation to Daniel and Kimberly's wedding. What a beautiful idea." I was holding the ceramic mug Samuel had given me on our last anniversary. It was blue, the color of his eyes. My hand froze halfway to my lips. An invitation. Beatrice. Yes, what a marvelous way to honor Edward's memory. Combining the wedding with the fundraiser, all on the 14th of October. So practical and so deeply meaningful. The whole town is buzzing about it. Combining, the word didn't make sense. My mind went blank. I couldn't hear what she was saying anymore. There was just a buzzing sound, like a trapped bee inside my head. The fundraiser. The wedding? No. No. They were separate. They had to be. "Martha, are you still there?" "Dear." I tried to answer. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My fingers, numb and clumsy, lost their grip on the mug. It didn't shatter. It hit the pinewood floor with a dull, heavy thud, a sickening crack. A dark stain of coffee began to spread across the wood grain like a creeping shadow. I just stared at it. The mug wasn't in pieces, but along thin fracture line had appeared, running right through the hand-painted letters of Samuel's name. Broken, not shattered, but broken from the inside out. "Martha, is everything all right?" Beatrice's voice was distant now, tinny with concern. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't. I knelt down, my old knees protesting, and touched the broken mug. It was still warm. For 5 years, I had been the keeper of my husband's memory. For 30 years, I had been the mother of my son. In that single moment, hearing those cheerful, innocent words from Beatrice, I realized both of those women had just died. The loving mother, the grieving widow, they were gone. And in their place, someone else was born. Someone colder, someone harder. The pain didn't come as a flood of tears. It was a single, sharp intake of breath, a paper cut on the soul. You don't realize how deep it is until you see the blood well up. The blood, for me, was a single thought, clear and cold as ice. He knew. Marcus knew. He had known all along. His silence hadn't been forgetfulness. It had been a choice. He had weighed his mother's heart against his fiancée's desires, and he had made his decision. I stood up. I walked past the broken mug, past the spreading stain on the floor. I went to the old roll-top desk in the corner, the one that had been Samuel's. My hands were perfectly steady now. I didn't tremble. I found the number in my address book. It had been years since I'd needed it. Elias Reed, our family lawyer and Samuel's oldest friend. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was warm and familiar. "Martha, what a pleasant surprise." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. The woman who did that was gone. "Elias," I said. My voice was low. It sounded like someone else's. "It's Martha. It's time. It's time to protect Samuel's legacy." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. Elias was a wise man. He understood the weight of those words. "I see," he finally said, his voice now serious. "Are you certain? Martha, once we do this, there's no going back." I looked out the window. at the rolling hills of Covington Meadows. My home. Samuel's home. Not theirs. Never theirs. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I said, "Before I tell you what that phone call set in motion, what gears began to turn in that quiet lawyer's office that would lead to the chaos on my front lawn, I have to ask, have any of you ever faced a moment like that, a truth so sharp it forces you to become someone else just to survive it? If you have, I'd be honored if you shared a piece of your story in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing you're not walking that road alone, that's the greatest strength of all." Part 4. A Wall of Quiet Steel. After that phone call to Elias, something inside me shifted. The trembling in my hands, the one that had been my constant companion for days, simply stopped. The hollow ache in my chest was still there. Of course, a space where a certain kind of love for my son used to live, but it felt different now. Less like an open wound and more like a forge. The pain was still present, but it was becoming purposeful. It was hardening me, preparing me. My phone started ringing. It would buzz on the granite countertop. A frantic, insistent vibration. I would glance over from the sink where I was washing vegetables from my garden. Marcus. His name would flash on the screen. A bright, cheerful picture of him from last Christmas beside it. He was smiling in the photo, a real smile. I would look at that smiling boy. My boy. And then I would dry my hands on my apron, set the phone face down without a word, and go back to my work. The messages came next. A steady drip of digital anxiety into the quiet pool of my resolve. At first, they were casual, almost routine. "Hey, Mom. Tried calling. Guess you're busy. Call me back when you get a chance." As if this were any other Tuesday. I read it, and a strange, bitter laugh escaped my lips. Busy? Yes. I was busy. I was busy dismantling the future he thought was guaranteed. A few days later, the tone shifted, a bit more urgent. "Mom, we really need to talk about the wedding plans. Kimberly has to give the caterer a final head count." I didn't reply. Instead, I poured every ounce of myself into the fundraiser. It became my sanctuary, my reason, my prayer. I spent my days in the cool, dusty air of the big barn, sorting through the items donated for the silent auction. An old, hand-stitched quilt from the ladies' auxiliary at church, its patterns telling a story of 100 Sunday afternoon. A hand-carved rocking horse from Mr. Abernathy down the road, its wood-worn smooth as riverstone. Each item was a piece of my community, a piece of the life Samuel and I had woven together, thread by thread. I would run my hands over the gentle curve of the rocking horse's back, and I could almost hear Samuel's deep laugh. See him in his workshop with sawdust clinging to his eyebrows. He would have loved this. He would have been so proud of what we were all doing in his name. The thought was both a comfort and a sharp, twisting pain. The messages from Marcus grew more frantic, the politeness fraying at the edges. "Mom, what's going on? Why aren't you answering? This isn't funny. Kimberly is starting to get really upset." I read the words, upset, as if her feelings were the center of this universe, as if her temporary frustration could ever be weighed against a lifetime of sacrifice. I deleted the message and went outside, pulling on Samuel's old work gloves. It was time to inspect the fences. The fences. That was always Samuel's job. He used to walk the entire 74 acres every spring, his stride long and steady, checking each post for rot, tightening the wire where it had sagged. He had a philosophy about it. A good fence isn't about keeping things out. "Martha," he used to say, wiping sweat from his brow, "it's about protecting what's inside. The soil, the flock, the family. You have to know what's worth protecting." I walked the fence line that afternoon. The late summer sun warm on my back, the air smelled of hay and dry earth. I ran my gloved hand along the top wire. It was still taut, still strong. A good fence. I remembered the day we finished the west pasture fence. The last one. We were young then. Or younger, at least. Our muscles ached in a good way. Our hands were raw. We sat on the tailgate of our old blue truck, sharing a thermos of coffee as the sun went down. And we looked out at what we had made. He had put his arm around me, his touch solid and real. One day, Marcus will run this place," he'd said, his voice thick with a father's pride. "He'll teach his own son how to walk these fences. This will all be his." A tear slid down my cheek, hot and unexpected. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of anger. A tear for the man whose faith had been so pure, so absolute. "I'm sorry, Samuel," I whispered to the empty field, the words stolen by the wind. "I'm so sorry." In that moment, I knew I wasn't just protecting the land anymore. I was protecting his memory. I was protecting his faith from our own son. A week later, I drove into town. I had an appointment with Elias Reed. His office is on the second floor of the old brick building on Main Street, the one with the pharmacy on the ground floor. The wooden stairs creak in the same places they did when I was a girl. Coming here with my own father. Elias has been our family lawyer for 40 years. He drafted our first will. He helped us incorporate the farm. He held my hand at Samuel's funeral and told me I was the strongest woman he knew. He is a good man, an honest man. He had a stack of papers on his large mahogany desk. Thick, important-looking papers, bound in blue. He wasn't smiling when he gestured for me to sit down. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, and his eyes were full of a gentle, profound sadness. "Are you sure about this, Martha?" he asked. His voice was soft. The way he spoke to me in the days after Samuel passed. "This is a permanent decision. Once you sign these, there's no going back. You know that, right?" I looked at the papers. I saw the neat, typed lines, the cold, legal language. I saw the spaces waiting for my signature. I thought of Kimberly's hashtags. Future mistress of the meadows. I thought of Marcus's silence on the phone that day. That terrible, cowardly silence that had condemned him more than any angry word ever could. I thought of Samuel's voice, full of pride, saying, "This will all be his." I picked up the heavy fountain pen from Elias's desk. It felt cool and solid in my hand, heavy with the weight of 40 years of hard work, heavy with the weight of a promise I was about to break in order to keep a much more important one, I'm sure. "Elias," I said, and my voice did not waver. I signed my name, Martha Covington, on every single page that required it. My signature was a little shaky, but it was clear. It was final. When I walked out of his office and back into the afternoon sun, the world felt different. The weight on my shoulders hadn't vanished, but it had settled. It was no longer a burden of confusion and pain. It was a mantle of purpose. I had made my decision. I had drawn my own fence line. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to cross it. The last message from Marcus came that night, as I was sitting on the porch, watching the fireflies begin to rise from the fields. It was just 3 words. "Please. Mom, please." I looked at the message for a long time. The boy who wrote that message, the one who knew how to plead with his mother, was still in there somewhere, but he was buried too deep, buried under a mountain of weakness and fear. I held my thumb over the screen, and I deleted the message. Then I turned off my phone. The time for pleading was over. The time for consequences was about to begin. Part 5. The First Confrontation. The phone calls stopped. The text messages stopped. For 3 weeks. An unnerving silence settled over Covington Meadows. The kind of heavy quiet that comes before a tornado. I kept busy. I met with the caterers for the fundraiser. I finalized the list of auction items. I walked the property every morning, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves, feeling the spirit of Samuel in the rustling wind. I did not allow myself to think about my son. The space he occupied in my heart was now a locked room, and I did not have the key. Then, 1 week before the 14th, they appeared. I was on the front porch, polishing the brass nameplate Samuel had installed beside the door. Covington Meadows. Est. 1978, when Kimberly's white convertible came roaring up the drive. Spitting gravel, it screeched to a halt, and they both got out. Marcus looked pale and tired. Kimberly, however, looked like a gathering storm. She wore tight jeans and a leather jacket, and she slammed the car door with a force that made the porch swing tremble. She didn't wait for Marcus. She marched right up to the bottom of the porch steps. but her hands on her hips. She was the one who spoke. My son just stood by the car, looking anywhere but at me. "We've been calling you for weeks." "Martha?" she said. She didn't use Mrs. Covington anymore. It was Martha now, a name, not a title of respect. I continued polishing the nameplate, my motions slow and deliberate. "I've been busy," I said, my voice calm. "Busy." She let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. "We drove all the way out here because you've been ignoring us. Marcus has been a rat. Don't you care?" I stopped polishing. I dipped the cloth back into the bowl of polish, then set it down carefully on the railing. I turned my full attention to her. For the first time, I let her see the coldness that had taken root inside me. "I care about the commitments I've made," I said. "I care about the memory of my husband, and I care that my son seems to have forgotten both." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up. "This is about the fundraiser still. We thought you'd have gotten over that by now. It's just a small-town charity event. We're talking about our wedding, a small-town charity event." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. 10 years of honoring my husband, of raising money for the local hospice that cared for him in his final days. Dismissed as something trivial, something to be gotten over. "This isn't a negotiation, Kimberly," I said, and my voice was harder now. "Of course it's not a negotiation," she snapped, her voice rising. Her composure was cracking. "We're not asking you. We're telling you, the wedding is next Saturday. The caterers are confirmed. The florist is confirmed. My relatives have booked flights from California. Hundreds of people have booked flights. You can't do this to us. You can't do this to us." As if I were the one inflicting the wound. As if my property, my life's work, was a public venue they had a right to. I looked over at Marcus. He was just standing there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a little boy caught between two warring parents, not a grown man about to be married. Kimberly saw where I was looking. She whirled around. "Say something." "Marcus," she cried, her voice cracking with frustration. "For God's sake, say something. Tell your mother." My son finally looked up. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it all. The guilt, the fear, the desperate wish to be anywhere else but there. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He shook his head. A small, helpless gesture. He had nothing to say. He had made his choice through his silence weeks ago, and now he had no words left. Kimberly stared at him for a long moment, her expression shifting from anger to disbelief, and then to a kind of cold fury. She turned back to me, her face set like stone. She had realized she was on her own. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Be that way. But the wedding is happening. Here. Next Saturday. We'll just have to work around your little party." And that was it. That was the moment the last bit of the loving mother in me withered and died. The sheer arrogance, the disrespect. To think she could just set up her wedding arch in the middle of my husband's memorial. I stepped forward, to the very edge of the porch, so I was looking directly down at her. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet. It was lower than before, but it carried the weight of 40 years of hard work, of love and loss and sacrifice. "The fundraiser," I said, enunciating each word with chilling clarity, "will take place on Saturday, the 14th of October. As it has for the last 10 years, this farm is not a place for negotiation. It is a place for remembrance." I paused, letting the words sink in. I looked from her defiant face to my son's broken one. "You both have a choice," I finished. "You can choose to attend, as guests, to honor the man whose name you carry, or you can choose not to." And with that, I turned my back on them. I walked across the porch, opened the heavy oak door, and stepped inside my house. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly, deliberately. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence. I stood there, in the cool darkness of the hallway, and listened. I heard Kimberly let out a strangled cry of rage. I heard the crunch of her heels on the gravel as she stormed back to the car. I heard the car door slam again, then the sound of the engine roaring to life, and the spitting of gravel as the white convertible sped away. leaving my son standing alone in the driveway. I waited. For a long minute, there was only the sound of the wind. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would walk up those steps. Maybe he would knock on the door. Maybe he would find his voice, but he didn't. I heard his footsteps, slow and heavy, walking away from the house, back toward the road. He was leaving on foot. He was choosing to follow her. I walked into the living room and sat down in Samuel's old armchair. The silence of the house was absolute, and in that silence, a single question hung in the air. A question for me, for them, and for the universe. What exactly was going to happen next Saturday? Part 6: 1,000 Paper Cranes. After they left, a strange sort of peace descended upon the farm. The final week was a blur of activity, but it was a quiet, focused kind of work. The phone did not ring. No more cars came spitting gravel up my drive. It was just me, the rustling of the autumn leaves, and the preparations. The anger that had been a hot coal in my chest for weeks seemed to bank down, leaving not coldness, but a dense, heavy calm. I no longer thought of my son. It was as if a door in my mind had closed, and I did not try to open it. Instead, I focused on the traditions, the small rituals Samuel and I had created for the fundraiser over the years, polishing the silver trophies for the charity auction, arranging the photo display of Samuel, showing him young and strong on his tractor, his smile wide and genuine. And at night, when the house was steeped in silence and shadows, I would begin the most important ritual of all. I would sit on the porch, under the soft glow of a single lantern, with a stack of creamy, ivory-colored paper, and I would fold, one by one. I would fold 1,000 paper cranes. It was a tradition we started the year Samuel got sick. I'd read somewhere that if you folded 1,000 paper cranes, a wish would be granted. A foolish, desperate hope, perhaps. But it gave our hands something to do in the long, quiet evenings in the hospital waiting rooms. Our wish, back then, was for more time. And in a way, it was granted. We had 2 more years together, 2 more autumns. After he was gone, I kept doing it, every year. For the fundraiser. The wish was different now. It was a wish for peace, a wish for his memory to be honored, a wish for the legacy we built to endure. Each fold was a memory, a sharp crease down the middle. I remembered the day we bought this land, standing on this very spot. Nothing but weeds and dreams around us. A fold to the left, the difficult first winter, when the well froze over and Samuel had to carry buckets of water from the creek a mile away. His hands were chapped and raw, but he never complained. A fold to the right, the day Marcus was born. Samuel held him up to the window, his voice thick with emotion. "Look, son," he'd whispered. "All of this, one day, it'll be yours to care for." I folded through the night, my fingers moving with a muscle memory that went deeper than thought. The pile of delicate, graceful cranes grew beside me, each one a prayer, each one a piece of my story, each one a brick in the wall I was building around my heart. They were not angry cranes. They were not vengeful cranes. They were just witnesses. 1,000 silent witnesses to a life that had been lived, to a love that had been cherished, and to a promise that was about to be broken. The night before the 14th, I had just finished the last one, number 1,000. I was threading a needle to string them together, to hang them from the rafters of the main tent. When the phone inside the house began to ring, it was late. After midnight, I knew who it was. For a moment, I considered not answering, just letting it ring until it stopped. But I knew I had to. This was the end of something. I picked up the receiver. I didn't say anything. I heard a ragged breath on the other end. Then, his voice. My son's voice. It was broken. "Mom," he whispered. It was the first time in months he'd called me that. Not Martha. Mom. I remained silent. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he sobbed. And the sound was raw, torn from somewhere deep inside him. "I messed up. I know I messed up. Kimberly, she doesn't understand. I tried to tell her I should have been stronger. I'm so sorry." I listened to him cry. The boy I had raised, the man I had tried to teach about honor and responsibility, He was finally saying the words I had longed to hear for weeks. But now that they were here, they felt like stones dropping into a deep, empty well. The ripples were small. They couldn't reach the sides. "I'll cancel it. Mom," he said, his voice desperate. "I'll call everyone. I'll tell them it's off. We'll lose the deposits. But I don't care. I'll fix this. I promise." He was trying to fix it, with a promise. The same way he had promised me he would handle it 6 months ago. He was still that little boy. Thinking a few words could sweep away the mess he had made, I took a slow breath. I looked out at the 1,000 paper cranes, glowing softly in the lantern light. They looked like a flock of sleeping birds, waiting for the dawn, waiting for the day of reckoning. "It's too late, Marcus," I said. And my voice was not unkind. It was just final. It was the voice of a truth that could no longer be changed. "It is too late. Tomorrow, you will have to face the choice you made." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I went back out to the porch, picked up the needle and thread, and began to string the first crane onto the line. The long night was almost over, and I was ready for the morning. Part 7. The 2 Processions. And so we returned to that Saturday, the 14th of October. I stood on the porch, my coffee long since cold, and I watched the 2 processions. It's strange. The things you notice when your heart has gone quiet. I wasn't just seeing cars and people. I was seeing intentions. The cars belonging to my community. They moved slowly, respectfully up the drive. They parked neatly where the signs directed them. People got out, and they looked at the house, at the barn, with a fondness in their eyes. They belonged here. They were part of this land story. Mrs. Gable from the library carried a Tupperware container, probably her famous lemon bars for the volunteers. Reverend Michael stopped to admire the oak tree Samuel had planted the year Marcus was born. They were arriving for a gathering, a remembrance. Then there were the others. The wedding guests. Their cars were impatient. They drove too fast on the gravel, their expensive tires spitting stones. They didn't look at the house with fondness. They looked at it as a backdrop, a setting. They were searching for the valet parking they must have expected. I saw a woman in a bright pink dress step out of a black SUV and immediately scowl as her high heels sank into the soft earth. She looked offended, as if the soil itself had wronged her. They were not arriving for a gathering. They were arriving for a performance. My gaze settled on the long, white limousine as it pulled to a stop in the most awkward place possible, blocking the path for both processions. The driver, a young man in a black suit, looked utterly bewildered. And then, the door opened. Marcus came out first. My son. I watched him with a scientist's curiosity. I observed the way he adjusted his bow tie, a gesture of profound nervousness. I saw the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. Even in the cool morning air, his eyes darted everywhere at the fundraiser banner, at the confused guests, at the volunteers everywhere except at the house, everywhere except at me. He was a man trapped in a cage of his own making, and he was desperately looking for an exit that didn't exist. Then she emerged. Kimberly, the bride. The dress was even more magnificent up close, a mountain of white silk and lace. It was a dress designed to make a statement, a dress for a queen arriving at her castle. But this was not her castle, and as her satin shoes touched my dusty ground, she was no longer a queen. She was just a girl who had made a terrible, terrible miscalculation. Her eyes, wide and furious, found me on the porch, and she started walking. No, not walking, marching. The train of her expensive dress dragged behind her, collecting bits of dry leaves and dirt. I remember seeing her stumble once, catching her foot in her own magnificent hem. A small, clumsy moment that seemed to expose the entire flimsy foundation of her grand plan. She stopped at the foot of the stairs. I didn't move. I just stood there, holding my cold mug, and I waited. "Mrs. Covington," she said, her voice a sharp, public accusation. "What is all this? This is our wedding farm." The silence that followed was heavy. The whole world seemed to stop. The volunteers froze with platters in their hands. The guests turned from their cars. Everyone was watching, waiting. I didn't answer her. I didn't even look at her anymore. My eyes were on my son. He had finally managed to walk over and now stood a few feet behind his fiancée. A silent, Useless witness. Kimberly. Realizing I was not going to engage with her, spun around to face him. Her beautiful face was twisted with a fury that was no longer controlled. "Marcus!" she shrieked. And the sound was ugly. It echoed slightly in the quiet morning. "Do something. Tell her. You told me you handled it. You told me she was fine with it." Marcus flinched, as if her words were physical blows. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You lied to me," she screamed. And now the tears were coming, black streaks of mascara running down her perfect makeup. She took a step towards him and poked him in the chest with a pointed finger. "You told me she was proud to have us continue the family legacy. You lied to me, and there it was. The truth. Not my truth. Not her truth. The messy, pathetic, cowardly truth that had been hiding in my son's silence for 6 long months. It was now laid bare for 600 of her friends and family to see, and 600 of mine." I watched the color drain from my son's face. He looked from her crying face to the crowd of staring guests. And finally, he looked at me. In his eyes, I saw it all. The shame, the regret, the terror of a small boy who had been caught. I lowered my gaze from his. I looked out over the crowd, at the 2 processions that had come to a standstill, and I finally spoke. My voice was not raised. It was quiet, but it carried in the still air. I did not speak to her. I spoke to him. "Marcus," I said, and his name felt like a foreign word on my tongue. "Silence is also a lie, and your lie is what invited all these people here today." And in that moment, as my son stood there, broken and speechless between his past and his future, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The performance was over. The consequences had arrived. If you are still listening, if you have journeyed with me this far, would you do me a kindness? Would you please leave the word legacy in the comments below, so that I know there are friends walking this path with me. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell you the final part of this story, the part where everyone, including my son, finally learned who the real owner of Covington Meadows truly was. Part 8. The Reading of the Trust. The clock on the old church steeple, visible from the hill where the main tent was pitched, struck 2 o'clock. A hush fell over the crowd. It was time. I walked from the porch to the small wooden stage we had set up. I moved slowly, my feet steady on the soft grass. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, the eyes of my friends and neighbors, filled with warmth and support, and the eyes of strangers, the wedding guests, filled with confusion and a kind of morbid curiosity. They had come for a celebration and had walked into a reckoning. I saw Marcus and Kimberly standing at the edge of the crowd, near the old oak tree. They looked small and lost. Kimberly's white dress was no longer brilliant. It seemed to have absorbed the shadows of the tree. Marcus was staring at the ground. They were still there. They hadn't left. A small, foolish part of my heart ached at the sight of them. I pushed it down. When I reached the podium, I took a moment. I looked out at the faces, at the rolling hills of my farm stretching out behind them, bathed in the golden light of the October afternoon. The 1,000 paper cranes I had hung from the tent rafters stirred gently in the breeze, like a congregation of quiet spirits. "Welcome," I began, my voice clear and amplified by the microphone. It didn't tremble. "Welcome, friends, neighbors, and guests. Thank you all for being here for the 10th annual Edward Covington Memorial Fundraiser." I kept my speech short. I spoke of Samuel, not as a saint, but as a man with calloused hands and a laugh that could shake the leaves from the trees. I spoke of his love for this land, not as property, but as a living, breathing thing that you care for, that you nurture, and that you pass on in better shape than you found it. Samuel believed that a legacy isn't something you own. I said, my eyes scanning the crowd, "It's something you build. It's not about deeds or titles. It's about the values you plant in the soil, hoping they'll grow for generations to come. Values like honesty, integrity, and respect." I let that last word hang in the air. I didn't look at my son. I didn't have to. This fundraiser, I continued, has always been our way of tending to that legacy, of giving back to the community that held us up when we needed it most. But this year, on this 10th anniversary, I realized that to truly protect a legacy, sometimes you have to do more. I paused. The crowd was utterly still. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. To that end, I said, turning slightly, I have asked a dear friend to join me on stage, a man who knew Samuel since they were boys, and who has been our family's trusted counsel for over 40 years. Please welcome Mr. Elias Reed. Elias, dressed in a somber but immaculate gray suit, walked onto the stage. He carried a leather-bound portfolio. He shook my hand gently, then stood at the podium. He exuded an aura of quiet authority, of laws and statutes and things that could not be bent or broken. The wedding guests, who had been whispering amongst themselves, now fell completely silent. They sensed a shift in the air. This was no longer just a small-town charity event. Elias cleared his throat. He put on his reading glasses and opened the portfolio. Good afternoon, he began, his voice deep and resonant. As Martha has stated, my name is Elias Reed. I have acted as the Covington family's legal advisor for many years. I am here today not just as a friend, but in my official capacity to read a legal declaration executed by Mrs. Martha Covington earlier this week. He held up a document. I could see the official seal, even from a few feet away. I chanced a glance toward the oak tree. Kimberly was gripping Marcus's arm. Her knuckles were white. Marcus was now looking up, his face pale, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He was starting to understand, not everything, but enough. Elias began to read. He read through several clauses of legal language. Words like whereas and heretofore. It was dense, impenetrable. It was designed to be, it was building the foundation, brick by legal brick. Then he reached the final, operative clause. He paused, looked out over the crowd, his gaze lingering for just a moment on my son. And so, Elias said, his voice slowing down, each word given its own space, its own terrible weight, by the power vested in me, and in accordance with the wishes of the sole proprietor, Mrs. Martha Covington, in order to protect the legacy of Samuel Covington from all future disputes, and to ensure that it serves this community in perpetuity, it is hereby declared, he took a breath, that the property known as Covington Meadows, but it is a vestiate meadow long, all 74 acres, its structures, and all assets contained within, has been irrevocably gifted to, and is now the sole property of, the newly formed Covington Charitable Trust. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a soft, whooshing sound, like the wind being knocked out of 1,000 lungs at once. Elias wasn't finished. This trust will be managed by a board of community members, he continued, his voice firm. The farm will no longer be a private residence. It is not, and never will be, personal property to be inherited or sold. It now belongs to this community, forever. He finished reading. He closed the portfolio with a soft, final click. For a stretched out moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear the paper cranes rustling overhead. Then, from the section where my friends and neighbors were sitting, someone started to clap. It was the mayor. He got to his feet. Then another person, and another. Within seconds, the entire half of the tent filled with my people was on their feet, the sound of their applause rolling through the air like thunder. It was not polite applause. It was a roar of approval, of understanding, of profound respect. The other side of the tent, Kimberly's side, remained seated. They were silent, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They looked at each other, then at the stage, then at Kimberly and Marcus. They had come to witness a union, a joining of families, an acquisition. Instead, they had just witnessed a dispossession, the ultimate act of letting go. Amidst the applause, I looked at my son. Kimberly had dropped his arm. She was staring at me, her beautiful face contorted with a hatred so pure it was almost breathtaking. But Marcus, he was not looking at me. He was looking up, at the name of his father on the banner above the stage. And in his eyes, I saw not anger, but a devastating, hollowed-out understanding. He had not just lost a wedding. He had not just lost an inheritance. He had lost his history. And he finally knew who was responsible. Himself. Part 9. The Aftermath. By late afternoon, a strange peace had settled over the farm. The wedding guests had long since departed. They didn't leave in anger. There was no shouting. No dramatic exits. They just dissolved. Car by quiet car. They vanished down the gravel path, leaving behind nothing but the faint imprint of their tires in the dust. The performance had been canceled, and the audience, having seen the real drama, had simply gone home. The fundraiser was in full swing. Laughter drifted up from the big tent. The auction was a success. My people, my community, had rallied. They had seen the morning's ugliness, and they had responded with an unspoken kindness, a determined joy. But I felt none of it. I had won, but it did not feel like a victory. I left the noise and the light behind and walked down the gentle slope towards the pond. Samuel and I used to come down here in the evenings. The water is dark and still, and it reflects the sky like a perfect mirror, and that's where I found them, sitting on the little wooden dock, side by side. Marcus still in his tuxedo. Kimberly in her magnificent, dirty dress. The setting sun caught the beads on her gown, making them sparkle. They looked like two characters from a fairy tale who had wandered into the wrong story. A king and queen deposed from a kingdom that was never theirs. They didn't hear me approach. I stood on the grassy bank for a long moment, just watching them. Kimberly was staring into the water. For the first time all day, her face was not a mask of anger or pride. It was just blank, empty. Marcus was hunched over, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He was not crying. It was a posture of pure, silent defeat. I walked onto the dock. The old wood creaked under my feet. Marcus looked up. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He looked older, 10 years older than he had that morning. "You took everything, Mom," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was broken. A quiet, shattered sound. I sat down on the edge of the dock, a few feet away from them. I looked out at the water, at the reflection of the sky turning from blue to orange. "No, Marcus," I said, and my voice was softer now, tired. "I didn't take anything. I just protected it. I protected it from people who didn't value it." I paused. Then I turned to look at him. "You had every chance to be the one to protect it. You were supposed to be its keeper. You chose not to be." He didn't answer. He just dropped his head back into his hands. He knew I was right. There was nothing left to argue. Then, a small voice beside him spoke. Kimberly. She hadn't moved. She was still staring at her own faint reflection in the dark water. "Why?" she asked. It was a single word. A genuine question. Not a challenge. Not an accusation. Just, why? I thought for a long moment. How could I explain it to her? How could I explain a lifetime of sacrifice to a girl who had never known anything but getting what she wanted? I looked out at the reflection of the old oak tree on the far bank. The tree Samuel had planted. "Because," I said, choosing my words carefully, "some things in this world are not meant to be owned. They're meant to be honored." We sat there in silence for a long time after that. The three of us, a broken family on a wooden dock. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the water turned from orange to a deep, bruised purple. The first star appeared in the sky. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if their wedding would happen, or if their relationship would survive the weight of this day. I didn't know if my son would ever look at me again with love in his eyes. I had protected the legacy, but the cost was still being counted. Part 10. The Unseen Harvest. That was 5 years ago. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday. I am 73 now. My steps are a little slower, and the ache in my joints is a little louder, especially when rain is coming. The farm is no longer mine. Not in the way the law understands it. It belongs to the trust. It belongs to the community. But in many ways, it has never been more mine than it is today. Marcus and Kimberly did get married. Not that day. They waited a year. It was a small ceremony. At the courthouse in town, I was there. It was quiet and awkward, but it was honest. They are still together, They bought a small house on the other side of the county. They come to the farm, maybe once a month, not as heirs. They come as volunteers. Last Saturday was our annual summer picnic for the kids in the scholarship program the Trust now funds. I was sitting here, on this porch, watching them. The lawn was full of children, their laughter like little bells in the afternoon air. And I saw Marcus. He was down by the west pasture, with a small boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, who had been struggling in school. My son was showing him how to mend a sagging bit of fence wire. He was patient. His hands were sure and steady. He was showing the boy exactly the way Samuel had once shown him. So many years ago, Kimberly was there too, serving lemonade in the big tent. She doesn't wear expensive dresses to the farm anymore. She smiles less. But her smile is real now. Watching them, I understood something. I learned that the greatest gift you can give your children is not your property. It is your boundaries. Love without boundaries becomes indulgence. And indulgence is a quiet poison. It weakens the ones you love most, leaves them unprepared for the weight of the world. By taking the farm away from my son, I believe I may have finally given him a chance to find himself. I hope Marcus learned something too. I hope he learned that a legacy isn't something you are handed. It is something you must prove worthy of. Respect doesn't come from a last name. It comes from your actions. He is slowly, quietly, taking action now. Perhaps one day, the board of the trust will see that. Perhaps one day, he will earn a place here that was never his to simply take. And maybe the biggest lesson is for all of us. Living in this fast world where everything is for show, we put our lives on display. We take pictures of our food. We create hashtags for our happiest moments. But the things that truly matter, they can't be captured in a photo. Honesty, sacrifice, memory, they don't have a hashtag. They are not the pretty backdrop for a perfect picture. They are the soil under our feet, the very ground we stand on, and we must learn to bend down and honor it before it is gone forever. The sun is getting low now. The children have gone home. A gentle breeze is rustling the leaves of the old oak tree, the same one Samuel planted. In the quiet, I can almost hear his voice, a low rumble like distant thunder. I close my eyes. I feel the last warmth of the day on my face, and I whisper to him, to the memory of him that lives in every corner of this place. Thank you, Samuel. I say, our legacy is safe now. And so, the story of Martha Covington and the Blackwood Legacy Farm comes to a close. It leaves me with a question, and I want to ask it of you. What do you think of Martha's final decision if you were in her shoes? Would you have done anything differently, please? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. I truly do read every single one, and your perspectives mean the world to me. If this story made you think, or made you feel something, please don't forget to leave a like. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who you believe needs to hear it. And be sure to subscribe to Deepu Cater Stories and turn on notifications, so you don't miss the next chapter we uncover together. Thank you for listening. I'll meet you in the next story, and who knows, maybe next time, it will be your story we tell.